Hello and welcome to Finding Your Collaborative Edge with Anni Townend and Lucy Kidd, the show in which we explore with leaders what it means to truly collaborate and how to find your collaborative edge. Today we are delighted to be in conversation with Jatin Patel, Inclusion and Diversity Director at England Rugby. Jatin, hello and welcome to our conversation.
Hello, thanks for having me this morning.
We're really looking forward to sharing with listeners more about you, your experiences and your insights into collaboration and what it means to really find your collaborative edge. Before we do that, one of the things that we often do when we're working with groups and teams to find out a bit more about each other at a human-to-human level rather than at that job title level is to ask them to introduce themselves through their name. So we thought we'd start with that today. It's the first time we're actually meeting each other in person and being in conversation together, the three of us. So we thought we'd start there. Anni, would you start?
I will. So I'm Anni Townend, and I haven't always been called Anni, but I have always been called Townend. And in the last 10 years, the two people who used to call me by the name that I was given when I was born have both died, my mum and dad. And now everybody calls me Anni. And I spend a lot of time telling people that my name is Anni without an E and Townend is Townend without an S. I'm also very proud to be a Yorkshire lass. So although I live in Sussex, the UK, and have done now for over 30 years, the northern grace and grit of being a Yorkshire lass lives on in me. That's who I am.
Thanks, Anni.
Thank you.
Jatin, tell us something about yourself through your name.
Yeah, sure. I'll probably split the two and go surname first, if I may. So Patel, very common Indian surname, hailing from Gujarat, which is sort of central Western India. And essentially my parents came over here, both from India, with very little to their names. The surname, whilst pretty common, is something of deep pride to me. And then Jatin is an interesting one. It's a name my auntie gave me, which is quite common in Indian tradition for the dad's sister to name your firstborn. And she named me Jatin, although she would call me Jatin. And my mother is the only person who calls me Jatin. And I very rarely pronounce my name as Jatin because it's always been a challenge for others to pronounce. And so much so that when I went to university, I gave up my name to an extent. I started introducing myself as Jay to make life easier for myself. Also, I thought, and certainly for those I was meeting, being in a new social kind of construct was quite, anxiety-inducing. So I walked around as Jay, and it's only when I left university and started working that I kind of reclaimed my name, so to speak, because I have no idea why I did it. I love my name, and so I do have to spend a lot of time helping people pronounce it properly. I've landed on it's like Latin with a J, just that's enough and that's fine. But yeah, I've been called Justin, Jatin, Yatin, Jatin, which is quite nice. So maybe for a future child if I have another. But yeah, that's me.
Thanks for sharing that with us. It's often the case, isn't it, when we do ask people to introduce themselves by their name, there is a story there and often a sense of reclaiming that identity at some stage for all sorts of different reasons. And it's not something that I'd really thought about for myself until Anni introduced me to this way of introducing us. Lucy means light in Latin and light bringer. And I've really connected with that in a way that I wasn't expecting to. I'm a very naturally positive and optimistic person and often look for the light in the dark when it does come. So yeah, it sort of gave me a connection with a name that I have never really had an opinion about.
That's the nicest way I've been able to introduce myself in a long time. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Because everybody has a name. And it's a way of making sure that everybody has a voice. And that's one of the first things in our collaboration equation, that creating psychological safety and giving everybody a voice to do that. It's a lovely way of saying something about who I am and being in the room, in the conversation.
Great way of meeting people.
It is.
And helping them feel well met, which is something that's really important to us.
And a way of telling a story and identifying it. You know, you sharing your story, Jatin, about your name, but starting with your last name and saying something about your parents and the fact that we know you're a dad as well, because of thinking about if you were to have another child, what name you would give them. And it's just a lovely, lovely way of saying something about who you are.
So we're here in conversation about all things collaboration, and we'd love to start by understanding a little bit about what collaboration means to you. We are hearing collaboration more and more in many different circles and conversations that we're in, which excites us and enthuses us. And it also raises the question about what do people really mean when they're talking about it, and do they know how to really be in collaboration purposefully and impactfully. So we'd love to start there around what does true collaboration really mean to you?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. And I think you're absolutely right. It's become a bit of a buzzword to some extent. I think sometimes weaponized in a way, because I think there are people who think collaboration is about just working with others to do things the way they wish to do it. And therefore they go, yeah, we need to collaborate on this. We need to, work together on this, without really thinking about what the collective outcome is being sought, and have you co-created the design towards that outcome, rather than I'm so-and-so, I have to achieve this, therefore I need to collaborate with others to make sure I achieve this. So for me, collaboration is true co-creation. It's about understanding collective needs to create and design collective goals and objectives, but having a really clear understanding, again, through that co-creation and co-design, as to how you're going to achieve it in a way that is fair, that is challenging, but equally, I think, and I'm about to say co-design for the third time, I think, in the space of a minute, but it's co-design. I think that point is really, really important, because, like I said, it's so easily, and certainly with people who potentially have a bit more power in an organisation or higher up the proverbial ladder, that fear of weaponising the terminology of collaboration, I think, is a very real one for a lot of organisations, and ultimately doesn't lead to good outcomes if you don't do it right.
It's a great point, particularly as we are seeing it come more to the forefront in ways of working and people feeling that they need to be in collaboration. But how do we ensure that actually when we are inviting collaboration and collaborative ways of working, we're doing that where we really are inviting people to input and to share and to be part of something, rather than be on the receiving end of something on a different agenda?
I think that's absolutely right, because otherwise you're just almost pulling a mask over some quite outdated ways of working and doing. And we're living in a world which is so interconnected. We have to collaborate. You can't work in silos anymore. You can't, and for any means, be it a commercial one, for a financial one, for a social one, you just cannot afford to not be actively co-designing, co-creating and collaborating ultimately. Otherwise, things fail.
And I think that's why we realised that bringing a mindset and behaviour of curiosity, care and courage is the way to co-design, to co-create, to truly collaborate, and that's what we can help people do and help them to find their collaborative edge through bringing curiosity, care and courage, because we have to collaborate. And in order to co-design, we need to be curious about each other. And what does success look like for you? What's the goal that you're reaching for? How can I be part of helping you to arrive at that, and vice versa, which is a very exciting edge to be at, and to care about each other and care that we will succeed together, and to have that courage to ask for help along the way when we need it.
What I really like about that, though, is that you've almost turned collaboration into the outcome in itself.
Yes.
And three very clear, tangible things you can do. I think often people think about collaboration and go, it's this undefined act, whereas you pulled your three sort of quite clear, tangible input, so to speak, to kind of go, well, if you do these three things, you're going to find your edge, you're going to find that collaboration, which ultimately is part of achieving the overarching objective, rather than, I think sometimes people feel the urge, the pressure to collaborate without really knowing what it means. And it's right, you kind of help unpack that for people, because sometimes it is as simple as listening better and asking those difficult questions and really taking care of each other in a way that means you're all working in the same direction. So yeah.
and they underpin each part of our collaboration equation. So we've already mentioned psychological safety, but also inclusive dialogue. So having that inclusive conversation where there is that real listening and asking questions and caring about how we impact on each other, leading to diversity of thought and feeling, and then that together, that combination. And I think we were particularly excited that you put inclusion, as we do, ahead of diversity, because for us, creating the safety, then the inclusive dialogue enables diversity of thought and feeling to happen.
Absolutely, and it's something that I think my colleagues are sick to the teeth of hearing me say, because when I started this role for England Rugby, which is the first time they've had an inclusion and diversity leader within the sport, I inherited a diversity and inclusion plan, and it was really well intended, really well thought out, had tons of KPIs, and hadn't really considered what needed to change for those KPIs to not just be achieved, but to stick, to be sustainable over a period of time. And so, as you just described, the inclusion stuff is the doing stuff. It's the stuff that's in everyone's gift. It can be developed like a muscle. You just got to practice it over and over again. Everyone has their own respective diversity. I never say I'm a diversity expert, which, for future employers, don't worry. It's not because I don't know stuff. It's because you can never be a true diversity expert, because everyone is diverse in one way or another. And anyone who says that they're an expert, I'm not saying they're lying, but they're probably not necessarily thinking about the breadth of understanding and humankind you'd need to understand to be a true diversity expert. But I am an inclusion expert. And I think everyone can become an effective inclusive leader, I should say, just by practicing how you engage people, how you work with them, how you listen to them, how you take care of them, how you make decisions, the things you proactively look to consider when there's an absence of different voice in the room, to ensure the things that you are deciding to do are well thought out, well rounded. Consider the end user, your customer, wherever it might be, in a really effective way. And all those things roll up to culture, right? And culture is another term that's been bounded around an awful lot. You've got all these culture professionals and experts, and I find that sometimes a little bit mind-boggling. I'm like, well, hang on, every culture is distinct in itself, and there are things you can absolutely do, the ingredients you put in to create a positive culture, but you cannot wake up one morning and this is going to sound awful. This is not to attack anyone who works in this space, but you can't create a culture in a month or in a few months working with your team and consultants. Like, they could absolutely create the intention and the direction, but true positive cultures are developed over time, and sometimes are quite hard to measure and sometimes quite hard to see, but you've got it because you feel it, right? And sport is a wonderful thing, because it is no secret that the most successful sporting teams have really healthy cultures.
Yes.
Of challenge, of collaboration, of honesty, of being able to be your true selves, etc. So I've gone off on an absolute rant, but the inclusion stuff has to come first. It absolutely does, because it's the thing that everyone can do. It rolls up, creates a positive culture, which then therefore allows for diversity of person, of thought, to truly flourish, and therefore has to be done that way around. And then there's in my world, there's also the E, which is sometimes equality, sometimes equity. Those things are outcomes of the first two things in my eyes. And I think anyone who over focuses on the equity stuff, it's really, really important. But that is the real structural. You're trying to attack hundreds of years of structure, which again you can't do overnight. So the I must come first, in my opinion.
And in our opinion.
We often talk about the mindset that underpins the behaviours. So when we're thinking about curiosity, care and courage, we talk about them as being mindset and behaviours. When we're thinking about inclusion and practicing inclusive dialogue, we talk about the mindset, and the belief that underpins that is really about believing that everyone has a valuable input and contribution to make. And until we interrogate that within ourselves as individuals, it can be really hard to practice being inclusive. So we're always inviting that curiosity around what are some of the beliefs that we're holding about people, about human beings, about society, about organisations, about work and effectiveness, performance, productivity, all of that might be getting in our own way. And getting really curious about some of the beliefs that underpin that.
It's such an important point. Like, we all have our own biases. And I think sometimes bias is seen as this loaded term. It's like, I'm not a bad person. Yeah, but having biases doesn't make you a bad person. Everyone has a preempted way of thinking, because that's how life works. Your nature, your environment dictates how you think about things. And like you just said, if you can focus on yourself first, focus on thinking beyond what you know and seeking to understand beyond what you think and know, then you're going to get yourself in a really good place to understand what you need to do next in terms of whatever action you're working towards. And I think sometimes people expect me to go and give them answers, and they get really angry when I start asking them questions. And then they get really annoyed when I start coaching them ultimately, and to say, tell me more, tell me how you would deal with this, because the answers that they have the answer. I'm never going to tell a high performance coach how to be a rugby coach. I am not at that level, but I can help them think about how they do their job in a slightly different way, and learn something along the way myself, frankly, because that it helps me be better at my job. It's a virtuous cycle, so to speak. And the kind of inclusion diversity discourse generally, I think, is sometimes, and it's been proven at the moment with the way that Donald Trump is attacking EDI initiatives, and to some extent, the reason why it's kind of working and not really, upsetting as many people as I would like to see upset by it, is because a lot of those programs are so focused on the numerical diversity changes rather than the cultures and the behaviours and the things that sit and should sit before it. And therefore it's easy to almost cancel hard targets set against representation on boards or in leadership teams, because yes, they're important. Of course, representation is important, but changing the things underneath that in terms of environments, cultures, etc., is significantly more. And that has to start with asking yourself, how do you go about doing those things in an earnest and sustainable way? Because there's too much paper cracking going on, and has been going on for too long, in terms of if we just change our CEO, we'll be fine. It doesn't work like that.
It's so much more than that, isn't it? And as you were talking earlier, I was thinking about, and not remembering the full quote, but that inclusion is a choice. And we have a choice around inclusion and making that part of our way of being, which is what we're encouraging in leaders. And thinking of everybody as a leader. And we also talk about creating cultures of care and connection, that we are all culture creators. And it's through how we show up each day with each other in our interactions, in our conversations, in the connections that we make with each other. I am curious, Jatin, how did you get into inclusion and diversity?
In a pretty kind of roundabout way, I'd say. When I was a student, I cared deeply about social issues and tackling social inequalities. So I was involved in student politics, both at Basvic, Sixth Form College in Brighton, and then I was student president at my university as well at Brunel. And then immediately afterwards, I started working in public affairs, moved very swiftly, though, into the charity sector. A lot of that work was around what's now coined social mobility, like trying to improve it and trying to tackle it. I was very happy in the charity world, probably would have stayed there. An opportunity came about to go and work for a big old professional services organisation, which I knew would make my dad proud. Which is, I think overnight he thought I suddenly became an accountant. I was like, no, Dad, please don't tell your friends I'm now an accountant, even though I was working for a huge accountancy firm. The charity sector, and I adore it. It does incredible work, but I think it would benefit and does benefit from people who've worked in different industries, such as corporates or financial services, because you learn how to work with individuals who have immense amounts of power and influence and resource that ultimately can feed into these kinds of organisations, changing things in society. So it was whilst I was there, I then moved into my first official sort of inclusion and diversity role. Then went to work for an international law firm. And I'd be there still if it wasn't for the fact that this job came up in a sport, and I love sport. And so I'm a very blessed person to be able to merge my everyday sort of skill set and professional skills with a personal passion. The ultimate outcome of sport isn't, yes, we need to make money and we need to be commercially viable and successful. But at the same time, the most important thing is people having fun. Like, people aren't enjoying your sport, then you're getting it wrong. And I think we've been challenged a little bit recently, but at the same time, rugby's a wonderful, transformative sport, which has got some issues, but I think the good definitely outweighs some of the less good.
And what role does collaboration play in the work you currently do?
Oh, everything. And much like the nature of rugby, because rugby is 1 to 15 on the pitch, you have to collaborate because everyone's different size, different shape, different skill set, different strength. And no individual can win you a rugby match by themselves. Well, there's a couple out there, but in the main, no one person can win you a rugby match. You have to collaborate, and similar in terms of in my day job. So the work I do covers pretty much everything from the staff body at the kind of England Rugby all the way through to trying to engage a new audience, a new fan set. And I don't drive these programs personally. I'm one of a team of 3 altogether, small but mighty as we are, and all we do is collaborate. So we work with respective departments who own particular programs, be it our rugby development department, who make sure community rugby is thriving and is being delivered effectively on the ground across the country. And we go and work with them on either specific projects to diversify the number of players or coaches or match officials, whatever it might be. And we don't tell them what to do. Like I said earlier, we work with them to understand how we can help them to understand the barriers that may exist, to help them in terms of the way they approach these programs, to set realistic and fair objectives rather than say we just want to engage thousands of young people from Black and South Asian backgrounds, for example. Instead, be much more meaningful about those objectives and be, okay, if you engage them, so what? What's next? How do we keep them in the sport? How do you get them to go and sign up to a club, etc.? And all of that requires collaboration. It requires us as a team to better understand them, how they deliver, the experiences of the people they're delivering to, helping our colleagues understand that and feed that into the way they work. And then ultimately, you'd hope in time, create a more inclusive approach that then leads to a more diverse population. So, sorry, it's a long-winded way of answering, because it's sometimes quite hard to answer the question as a kind of inclusion and diversity practitioner, because, I'd love to spend all my time campaigning and kind of, beating the drum on inequalities. They absolutely exist and that there's a time and space for it. But in my eyes, this job has to be about rolling your sleeves up, seeking to understand effectively, collaborating and influencing, frankly, because there's a lot of influencing involved as well in terms of reminding people why. And for sport, I think the only sport that doesn't really have an issue in terms of participation broadly is probably football, because it has such universal coverage, not just in England, but across the world. But, as a sport, we have to engage new audiences. We have to work with different populations that we haven't before, simply because we need more people playing our sport. It's really simple. So the inclusion and diversity business case, and I hate that term, but the business case is inextricably linked with the broader challenge that we as a sport, as many others do, face, which is growth. And so that's how I try to approach it.
One of the things that I hadn't really thought about, but I can hear is a thread running through collaboration, I think, from what you've been describing, is helping each other. Because you've used the word, we seek to understand, we seek to help, and how can we help? And there's a real sense in which collaboration for you is about helping others that comes across.
Oh, it's everything, Annie, because it is so easy to drop I&D initiatives in organisations, in corporate entities, because so often a lot of them will claim that they're not seeing the outcomes or the impact. And it's because, and I'm by no means perfect, and I'm not trying to say that I'm doing it better than others or anything like that, but it's because too often those programs are too focused on the numerical change rather than the deep cultural change and frankly, people understanding of each other better, right? And so therefore, you're absolutely right. The thread of collaboration is incredibly important to me, probably the most important thing, because I'd be very, very comfortable, and I've probably got examples of it now, 4 years, near enough 4 years into my job, like you've got examples where we haven't made much material change in terms of numbers. If you stack up the data on representation in certain programs from 2021 to 2025, there might not be much difference, but the way I can see colleagues now approaching the way they engage different communities, ripping off the plaster, because some of them, they're showing courage because you've got people who have never engaged, lower socioeconomic communities or Black and Asian communities. And the first question they would always ask me was like, well, I've never engaged them before, I don't know how to. And I'm like, okay, well, that's okay. At least they've found the safety to at least be honest in that sense. Yeah. And then you work with them to do that. And so there's something about, sometimes it's hard to measure inclusivity, but when it's happening, it's become normalized. Therefore, it's going to be sustainable over time. And over time, you'll see that change, but you're not going to have material change happen overnight. It absolutely takes time. So collaboration, anyone, I would encourage anyone working in roles like mine to make sure, if they're not, they are thinking about what the priority is, because it has to be collaboration.
And maybe where they can ask for help with that. 100%. I love that people, have come to you and said, oh, I've never done that before, and how can you help me? That they, one, feel safe enough to be able to say, we don't know how to do this, and that you've created an environment where, and you're known for collaborating, that they will come to you and ask you to help them.
No stupid questions, Annie. And it's a firm belief, because I've asked plenty of stupid questions in my life, and I continue to do so. I was in a meeting with my other directors just last week. I won't say what the question was, because it's probably not a bit sensitive, but I felt so stupid asking it. But actually, in the person who then answered it, they kind of looked at me at first and went, does he mean that? Does he really not understand it? And it was in the follow-up question that allowed me to get into to my point, because sometimes I struggle with what I'm trying to say because I talk too much. That's really, really creating space where people can ask silly, or seemingly stupid questions. Sometimes we forget, the smartest people forget to ask the most basic, simple questions sometimes.
Well, it's that thinking out loud, isn't it? And something that we help leaders do is to create that thinking environment in which it's okay to think out loud. It's okay to say, I don't know, or I'm not sure how to go about this. And it feels safe to be able to do that. And somebody else may know. And then we can get to our collaborative edge through having that conversation and doing our better thinking together.
I love that. It triggered a thought. I saw what I thought was a ridiculous post on LinkedIn earlier this week. Not that LinkedIn's the be-all and end-all of the world, but it was someone saying that the best leaders are ones who are decisive and don't overthink and don't think too much, but take action and almost don't waver. That is the most bonkers thing I think I've ever read. Not because being decisive is not important, absolutely is, but creating the space to really internally kick the tires of a decision, and then with your fellow leaders do exactly the same and create a safe space to do that. And you can do it in a defined amount of time. Obviously, do not spend weeks and weeks on making a decision, because you probably got in the wrong place. But to understand that you need to create that time and space to reflect, if you're a reflective leader, but then work with your fellows to kick the tires of an important decision is always going to amount to a better decision, right? So
absolutely.
I thought it was there's something about that, maybe that mentality of like, if you can't do things quickly, if you can't summarize an important point, that you're failing at leadership. And I kind of completely disagree with that entirely. I'm not saying you to write essays. When someone says to me, can you just chuck me a couple of bullets? I'm like, no, my issue is more nuanced than that. Sorry, I can't. Like, either we have a conversation, we do it properly, or you don't care. It's one or the other. So, yeah.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Let's have a conversation, and then we understand it better. And that's what we lead for, is helping people to have those conversations. And back to curiosity, care and courage, but to have those conversations and to be clear that we're having a conversation, thinking something through together, and we've got this amount of time to do that. Let's bring our thinking. And something you're really good at is have we got diversity of voice in the conversation? Have we got diverse opinions being represented here? Where are we not looking? Where do we need to look and bring those diverse voices in and give those voices, those people, those ideas room to breathe? And then get to making a decision together. And or someone is trusted to go and make a decision. Having heard all of that is another possibility.
And to invite challenge along the way, to be courageous enough and confident enough to invite challenge, to test your own thinking, and to be prepared to come to a different conclusion once you've got those different voices and different ideas and thoughts and feelings in the conversation.
I think that point around embracing challenge is critical, because sometimes we're living in such a kind of binary society, which is like, I'm right, you're wrong, and that's it. And there's no space for the grey. And I think it's a real problem, and one that's kind of really growing, and one we need to try and tackle head on. Because embracing challenge doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're necessarily wrong. But will improve your decision making, will improve your relationships with your team, and ultimately it helps to plant the seeds of other leaders and create an environment of trust, which is only going to benefit you as a leader, but also the people you're working with and the cultures which you're working in. But yeah, that challenge piece, it's dying art.
It can be helpful to recognise that it's natural to feel defensive when you're kind of encountering a different view or different opinion, and then to be willing to go beyond that and to be curious to go beyond that. So to recognise, we talk about when we find that edge, when we feel that friction, when the edges are rubbing up against each other, to make a choice. Are we going to defend? Is it the time to defend, or actually is it the time to blend? And is it the time to be more open, more curious, more courageous and more caring in terms of the exploration it's going to take to get there, to find that collective?
Yeah.
And being willing to say something that you said earlier, Jatin, around where you might say, I think very differently about that. Tell me more. Help me to understand your thinking about that, so that there's the possibility of moving and blending and finding a way through together, or acknowledging that we have got a different perspective on something at the same time as we may feel similarly about it. And that's why we have diversity of thought and feeling, because of the importance of, we may feel passionate about the same thing, but we think about it differently. Or we might feel very differently about something, but we think the same thing. So it's creating that space for the thinking and the feeling, being able to say, I feel uncomfortable with that, or I feel really excited by that, and that to be okay. And it not to be, seen necessarily as a challenge, but appreciated as that tells you something about me. Tell me something about you.
We've talked about curiosity, care and courage, and we're always inviting that in others. We were curious to know perhaps when someone else's curiosity, care or courage has helped you find your collaborative edge.
I had a very, very senior leader very randomly just invited me out for a coffee. I've been in this situation where I have these ideas about improving how and expanding the remit of what I do to benefit the organisation, but also to benefit myself in terms of stretching my capacity and my skill sets and my expertise. And I sat down with this leader, and they very quickly, he's one of these incredible people he's amazing at listening. And sometimes when I'm talking, I'm looking at him going, knowing how busy he is, how successful he is, I'm like, how has he got this capacity to listen to me, little old me? He sat there, listened to me, and I said to him, I'm thinking of positioning this new way of working. I'll probably wait until the end of the financial year to propose it. And he said, what on earth are you waiting for? I felt like a little kid at school. I was like, I don't actually know. So I started giving a very sort of ill thought answer, wasn't well constructed, and he just looked at me. He's a person of colour, which I mention only because there are not very many people in leadership positions in rugby who are people of colour. And he said to me, when I find myself in a room with other senior leaders and I look around, I don't assume they are better than me. And I don't think about them being better than me. I think about what I've done to get myself in this room, the barriers I've, got past, the extra yards I've had to put in. So I want you to understand that you don't need to worry about that imposterous voice that sits in the back of your head, because everything you've achieved to date is off the back of your hard work. I didn't say anything about my nerves. I didn't say anything about how I was feeling, about why I was being tentative. But he read that from what I was saying. So I've not felt that seen or heard probably ever in my career, if I'm being honest. And to be seen and heard by someone who I deeply admire, who is incredibly influential and an amazing role model, was just amazing, because it gave me incredible confidence. I actually went back. That was a Friday, so on the Monday, I'd already spent some time on over the weekend doing some extra work to stick the proposal in. It allowed me to find a collaborative edge in that it took away the fear I had to do something that not only would have benefited me, but is going to benefit the organisation. So that's probably the best example I've got.
It's a fantastic example, isn't it, of curiosity, care and courage in play, that through their listening, deep listening, and their curiosity and care about you, and potentially some shared experience and recognition of themselves in you. And if they are listening, they'll know whether that's true or not. And you feeling really seen and heard, cared for and valued, and it giving you the courage to do what you did on the Monday, which was to put it in sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely right. It was an incredible thing.
It's a gift.
It is a gift, and it costs nothing financially. It's and it's something we can all bring and put that focus in on how the impact we can all have on each other in instilling belief and
giving confidence.
Encouraging and giving confidence, building confidence.
It's always a hidden permission as well. I think sometimes people don't think they can do the right thing because it's different, because they feel they need permission.
Yeah.
And it's like it's unspoken permission, because you kind of, when you talk about it after the fact, you kind of go, well, of course you should do that. It's the right thing to do. But sometimes that it can feel quite hard, because you feel like, but it's not the way we've always done things, or that's not what I'm meant to be doing. But if you know it's right, like sometimes just offering that kind of hidden permission. Encouragement.
We talk a lot about that, don't we? The courage and the encouragement to be courageous.
I love that distinction. It's really good, actually.
It's really important. And you were encouraged, and they cared enough about you to encourage you to go for it.
And as you were describing that, you shared how in that moment you felt like a little kid again, like, I don't really know the answer, I don't really know what I'm supposed to say, and kind of that's quite a strong feeling, isn't it, when it comes. I'd often feel it in my belly if it came, or kind of in my throat and my chest. And it's so powerful to understand what that feeling means when it comes up for you, and to be able to either surface it and share it, or to be able to notice it and kind of go, this means I'm at my edge. Yeah. This means I'm at the edge for me. What do I need to be able to work through that edge, and to kind of move through the edge, or to push the edge, or to break the edge, to go beyond? You've
just triggered another memory of a manager I had very recently as well, who, when I first started a role with them, every time I had one-to-ones, I'd ask a question and they'd never give me an answer. They never used to give me an answer. They would be like, well, what do you think? And they'd be coaching me. I knew they were coaching me, because I'm trained as a coach myself. I was like, you're coaching me. I want an answer. I need an answer. But as our relationship developed and we became closer, I realised what they were doing. It was dual benefit. For them, they were very consciously aware that they didn't know the answer. And why would they, when I'm the expert in this space? Their job wasn't related to mine. They just happened to be a very senior person who I reported into. And they were really aware of that. So they're like, no, you know the answer. You clearly need some time to bounce, and because that's how I do my best work. And the other thing it did, the other benefit which it had for me, was that it empowered me as a leader, because this was my first proper leadership role. So, I spent the first year just rabbit in headlights going, I just don't want to fail. I don't want to fail. I don't want to let down, I don't know, me? I don't know who am I letting down. Who am I letting down? I don't let down everyone. I felt like I was trying to let down everyone. But it empowered me so that, within a pretty short period of time, our conversations, I wasn't going with questions. I was going with, this is happening. I'm going to do this. Thoughts. And suddenly it can revolutionize our relationship, because I wasn't asking them for the solutions. I was asking them for their opinion. And there's a big distinction there. And I felt, because they made me feel empowered, and ultimately stuff was getting done better after that, which is great.
It's having somebody to be a sounding board, isn't it, really, in that situation, not necessarily to give advice or to ask questions, but to be able to think out loud and to have a space, a person with whom you can do that thinking with, test out an idea and get their thoughts.
Completely. Trust as well. Oh my God.
Yeah, trust is so important.
Once I got it, once it clicked, I was like, I can trust this person, because another type of leader would just go, we'll do X or do Y and just crack on. Just get out of my hair and get on with it. Whereas they were encouraging me to
trust yourself.
Trust myself, trust my decision making 100%. And I know for a fact they'd always be there. I didn't ever fail hard, but they were always there when I didn't quite, nail it. And that's important.
So we're nearing the end of our conversation together today. Is there anything else you'd like to share or include or ask before we come to our conclusions?
Courage. It's a really interesting term, which I think is a bit of a loaded term for some. How would you both describe it in its simplest form?
I looked up the word courage a while ago, and it comes from a word associated with heart, so heartfelt. And the way I think of it is speaking from the heart, having the heart, the wholeheartedness to speak with both of you today, to be in conversation with you, to be myself, and also to be able to be vulnerable as well as to speak up, not to hold back. That's why I associate also with being encouraged. So our conversation as we walked into this room was very encouraging, which gave me courage, meeting you, Jatin, for the first time, the courage to have the conversation. And sometimes we talk about courageous conversations, having conversations that are uncomfortable sometimes because we don't know the answers or we don't quite know where we're heading. So for me, it's about trusting, that trust comes into it, but also that I am wholehearted where I am and who I'm with. What about you, Lucy?
There's something around sharing something of yourself with courage from the heart wholeheartedly. And also when we're particularly thinking about how we invite courage to enable collaboration and to find collaborative edge, it's imperative that we're doing it on a foundation of curiosity and care. If just one of those three, the curiosity, care, or the courage, is lesser, then the whole diminishes. When we're thinking about courage and inviting it in everybody, because this is about inviting it in leadership and life. So, and everyone we would love to see bringing more curiosity, care, and courage. It really is about sharing something of yourself, and also thinking about where the possibility is to create something shared rather than it to be all about you. And that takes courage, that takes some bravery to give up that self, that personal agenda that we've spoken about, and to believe that actually something better can come by sharing and giving that up, surrendering that self-interest, that personal agenda to create something collective.
I love that. And I love what you both said there, because I think a lot of it is, for the objective observer, I think sometimes courage is seen as something that you need to be, which is different to yourself. Like something that's not yourself, something that is better or more superior to yourself. But what you both ultimately said is actually, no, just being the very best version of yourself. And like you said there beautifully, which is to almost be sacrificial to an extent to better yourself and therefore better the whole by being more curious and caring is really lovely. And I love that. Thank you for that, because I think, for many, courage sometimes is a bit of a scary act that requires something heroic, and not something about out of this worldly, but actually it's not really in itself.
Becoming a bit more of yourself.
Exactly right. Yeah. And just ripping that plaster off.
Yeah. Thank you for the exploration and sharing of everything that we've spoken about and journeyed through together. We'd really like to bring our conversation to a close by asking you to share 3 key invitations to others to help them find their collaborative edge.
Sure. I mean, so the first one I would say is start with yourself. Don't be afraid to reflect. Reflect on yourself as much as you can. Take care of yourself. Be courageous. Do those great things, because to be truly collaborative, you need to make sure you're firstly in the right place as a leader in any position, frankly, yourself, and it absolutely starts with yourself. The second one, and one I pride myself on, is don't underestimate how important being a good listener is. My God, sometimes, and I think particularly as you become when you become more senior, you become more experienced, and you become a leader, sometimes the pressure to have all the answers yourself, to be the person driving and taking and pulling people along with you. Yes, that is an important trait, but it is best done when you really know the people around you really know the issues deeply. And the third one is kind of similar to what we've been talking about just now, which is don't be afraid to be yourself. I've really struggled with that part of myself and not being or feeling I can be myself for a large chunk of my career. And it's only in the last few years where I've really just let rip and gone, hang on, I'm a good person, and that stuff should be allowed to shine in a professional setting, because that's not only going to help me, it's absolutely going to help people around me. So don't shirk away from being yourself. Obviously there are limits and I think that's right. There are boundaries that should be created. But at the same time, being able to do your work with people that you care about genuinely, in search of a collective goal, in a way that is collaborative, fun, authentic, isn't that what we're all here for, ultimately? Otherwise the rest is boring. So yeah, be yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Jatin, for our conversation and our exploration. And for those listening or watching who would like to learn a bit more about you or about England Rugby, what's the best way for them to connect?
LinkedIn is probably the best place to do that. So I don't know my exact LinkedIn handle, but if you search for Jatin Patel and England Rugby, I'm sure you'll find me. Thank you.
And thank you to those listening. If you would like to find out more about our collaboration equation, please visit our website, collaborationequation.com, and follow us on LinkedIn. And a huge thank you to Brown Bear Studios for the production of our show, and to Schmogus Media for the sharing and marketing of it. Thank you to Anni for your partnership and collaboration.
Thank you, Lucy.